And shame is such a powerful feeling. It's one of the big three feelings, I call it, that have kept humans alive in a world of threat, and have helped humans evolve to be the dominant species on the planet. Because what shame does is it keeps us in the group, and we're more likely to survive in a group than as individuals. Yeah? Shame cannot survive being met with empathy. So if we find the courage to say how we're feeling, and to say the stuff that the shame doesn't want us to say, and somebody meets us with empathy and says, yeah, I know how hard that is, then somehow we can cultivate a certain amount of resilience towards it. You know, how do we combat shame? What are we supposed to do? Do we push it away? Do we chop it up? Do we put it in an incinerator? You know, what can we do? It's part of us, you know. It's been embedded in us such a long time that to be free from it, for me, seems unrealistic. So I might as well accept it.
Hi, my name's Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to another episode of Life Talk. Today I'm here with someone who's very special to me, a man named Malachy Dunne. How are you, Malachy?
I'm well, Johnny. Yeah, and it's lovely to be here. You know, we've been planning to do this for a while now, so it's great that we've finally got together to do it, or not got together. But...
Yeah, I mean, it's a real honor. You know, you're a very special person to me, as you know. So being able to do this with you is slightly surreal, but also really, really fun. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to listening to you today.
Yeah.
Okay. So Malachy, for those who don't know, is the founder of a business called Lifetime Therapy here in Cornwall, but obviously offers services to the entire world, I'd imagine. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, we work all over the place.
Yeah, I can't, you know. Yeah, the fact that you can touch the souls all over the planet is quite cool. If you're listening to it, you can't see his face right now.
All right, okay.
You're a counselor, you're a psychotherapist, a teacher, a clinical supervisor, but most important, a human being.
I'm a human being, yeah. And I think just for a minute, there's two. When we say human being, we probably don't think very much that there's two words there. I'm human, with all that entails, and on a good day I spend a bit of time just being, you know. And I think being human and just being informs a lot of the work that I do, you know. I have a tendency to be a human doing.
And what does that mean?
Well, what it means is doing whatever I can in order not to experience myself fully in the moment. You know, to do anything to step away from generally difficult emotions.
Well, that brings us nicely on to today's topic, actually. The reason I got to meet you is because I've been very public about it on other platforms and forums. I suffered some pretty significant childhood trauma. I had to witness some domestic violence and was a survivor. I've learned to call myself from yourself of child abuse. And it's tormented me for the best part of my life. It's caused me a lot of difficult times, and something that I never ever thought was an option. I've tried to fix it. I've tried to change it. I've tried to do many things to combat, address all these different things that I'm sure everyone else has tried with their own trauma, but never ever had I ever considered accepting it. And I never forget the first time that you spoke to me about acceptance. I have to admit, I was initially dismissive of it. I thought, I'll let you finish what you're saying, and then I'll talk about something else. But the way in which you put it to me and the question in which you asked me made me think. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to let you talk about acceptance.
Oh, wow. That's no small order. It's funny, when you were going through those words about fix and combat was one of the words you used, I think. What came to mind was, my trauma. If I was trauma and people were trying to fix me or combat me or address me or get rid of me, I'd just be getting stronger. If I was that trauma, I'd be thinking, there's nobody going to combat me. There's nobody going to fix me, And I just think, and that I think that, acceptance is just, it's got such a gentle strength, and we'll come back to that. You're not the only person who's been skeptical about the power of acceptance, and you're probably looking at the person who's been more skeptical than anyone else. I spent a lot of time in my life, significant chunks of time, being so skeptical about what I do, about being a therapist, about being a counsellor. I was scathing about therapy for many, many years, which you might find surprising to hear.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. But I think probably because I come from that skeptical, scathing place, which is right out on the extreme, often there's been a pendulum effect, and I found myself right at the other end now, where what I believe is that acceptance is probably the most effective thing. I can't give it a name really. Attitude. I don't want to say tool. I don't want to say concept. Thing. Let's stay. And we'll come to that. The ability to be vague and the unanswered question and not having the right word bit in a bit. In facilitating change in human beings that I know of.
Yeah.
It really is. Having said that, I was very skeptical about therapy and counselling. I've had a fair bit of it myself over the years, for various reasons, we'll say, various reasons, and we might touch on some of them. But I think the thing that informed my earlier life, and perhaps even into my 30s, I'm 61 in a couple of weeks' time, and I quite like being an older guy, which is great because I haven't really got much choice, have I? Let's for a minute, let's consider the alternative. I'm either an older guy or I'm a not older guy, and that means a dead older guy,
Yeah.
So maybe a bit of acceptance there could be useful. But I think the thing that informed the first half of my life, say up to my late 20s certainly, was I found it really difficult to live with my emotions. And I would do many things and pretty much anything to not be with my feelings. I learned, about at the end of my 20s that was not a sustainable thing for me. And I guess I spent the next 30 odd years finding different ways to negotiate my life that were more effective, more sustainable. Some of which has involved therapy, some of which has involved not therapy, some of which has involved working so hard to run away from my emotions, spending so hard to run away from my emotions, doing anything so hard to run away from my emotions. a lot of difficult processes, and I was fortunate enough, and it's going to sound strange, I was fortunate enough to have a fairly traumatic marriage breakdown about 15 years ago now, and to be able to bring the idea of being fortunate to a very difficult situation is, I suppose it's unusual to think of things like that. But that crisis helped me open my eyes, open my ears, and become open to some new ideas. I got a fair bit of therapy at the time, and I realized that for most of my life, I'd actually wanted to be a therapist, but I just didn't know what the words were. I didn't know, even as a young child, I used to say I want to be a psychologist, and I didn't actually know how to go about it. And just fortunately, through that crisis, I ended up doing some training, which I'm still doing. 15 years on, I just had an email pop up here on the screen from my tutor at the university, and he's a really nice man, half my age, So that's another thing that I've learned, is that learning is everywhere. That really is, learning is everywhere if our eyes are open. Great one for the Instagram.
Yeah.
So where were we? And forgive me if I wander a bit. We were talking about.
Not at all.
So the theorist, I trained initially as a person-centered therapist, and the person behind that is a man called Carl Rogers. And in a nutshell, Carl Rogers, and it's outside on my office wall here, is when I accept myself as I am, then I can change. It's a simple, however, quite difficult to get alongside of paradox. A paradox being a thing that makes sense that doesn't make sense.
Another word that you've brought to my attention.
What, paradox?
Yes.
Yeah, paradox.
I see it everywhere now, thanks to you.
Yeah, well, we are surrounded by paradoxes. And, the paradox of accepting oneself, facilitating change, is so powerful. But then we need to do a bit of thinking. And one of the things that I'm really interested about in therapy, people make the assumption that therapy is solely addresses emotions, but it can also address our thinking. And we can really examine how we look at the world, how we think about the world, and particularly the assumptions we make about knowledge and and realize things that we think we know often are only opinions. And that can be really scary, letting go of the things that we think of as certainties, and realizing that there are more uncertainties than certainties in our lives. And a question that invariably comes up within 2 sessions with people who come to see me is, which would you prefer? It's a choice question. Which would you prefer, the answer to every question or the ability to live with unanswered questions? And most people know what the best answer is, but often would prefer the least, I want to say the least useful answer, that constant search for answers rather than an ability to just let questions come and wash over us and elicit curiosity. So Carl Rogers, I started training. This guy, Carl Rogers' work really felt like a homecoming for me. It felt like where I should have been all my life, and that I'd finally arrived in a place where I was understood and accepted.
Wow.
Really lovely. And I did a few counselling courses. I really enjoyed them. I felt like, I can remember I used to wake up on a Tuesday morning and think, yes, really, you know, and my passion for it has not diminished, and I'm fortunate to have a life where I don't go to work. You know, I just get up and be me these days. You know, which is, I guess I want to say a blessing. It's a thing that I'm really grateful for. And we'll talk about gratitude as well in a minute, or maybe we'll talk another time about gratitude. Who knows? Who knows? So acceptance. Right. Here's a thought of mine. When people train as counsellors, many people just accept what they're told, and they become fairly proficient counsellors. And you know, I would say, you know, they're okay. But I'm not like that. Whenever anyone gives me an idea or a concept, I will take it apart and see what I can do to, first of all, question it to see if it actually is what it says it is. And then what I'll do is to see what I can do to make it more effective. And then another thing I will do is to see if I can come up with something that is even more effective myself, a bit of original thought. And I don't think I've come up with that many original concepts in my time, but I have come up with original ways of communicating difficult concepts. And I think that is really where, and I find it hard to say this, I think this because my old friend shame kicks in. That is where my talents, my unique talents lie, that I'm a very good communicator of difficult concepts, and I can find a way to help most people understand ideas in a way that really works for them, just for them. You know, I can find a way in with most people. And that is, yeah, I would say that's where my talents lie. And it's really hard to say that, you know.
Why is it hard to say that?
Well,
because I obviously take you as I see you, and that is as somebody who's, you know, got that education plus experience, as you told me, which creates what? Wisdom.
That's true. And I feel embarrassed now that you kind of told me that I say that. But anyway, that's our old friend Shane, right? And Shane, right? I was brought up to believe that to blow one's own trumpet, to kind of say that to brag was somehow wrong. Now, and what I can do, and so that's become a rule for me. That's become a kind of what we call in my business an introjected belief. Thou shalt not brag is the rule. So when we break the rules, and this goes back to real early human evolution, the feeling we have when we break a rule is shame. The group rule is thou shalt not brag, and I'm breaking it. And shame is such a powerful feeling. It's one of the big three feelings, I call it, that have kept humans alive in a world of threat, and have helped humans evolve to be the dominant species on the planet. Because what shame does is it keeps us in the group, and we're more likely to survive in a group than as individuals. So the other two are disgust and anxiety, but we might come to them in a minute. That's another talk, really. So, and shame is such a powerful feeling. It comes in. It works on us in two ways. The first one it does is it keeps us silent. We just don't even say. We're automatic. We talk about automatic obedience to shame. We just don't even say. And if we climb out of the silence and kind of stand on the edge of this pit of silence that the shame is wanting to keep us in, and there we are, what it does then is it just points a big finger at us and goes, bit like the old Monty Python, big finger out of the sky, and goes, who do you think you are? It ridicules us, you know? So for me to say, I have a unique talent, you know, the message that comes into my head, you know, despite the fact that I've worked and worked and worked, is a feeling of shame that says, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Listen to him blowing his own trumpet, you know, that inner dialogue is what happens for me. And I'm very interested in the work of a woman called Brene Brown. And if any of you out there haven't come across Brene Brown, just Google Brene Brown and get on it. She's great. She's amazing. And she says that shame cannot survive being met with empathy. So if we find the courage to say how we're feeling and to say the stuff that the shame doesn't want us to say, and somebody meets us with empathy and says, yeah, I know how hard that is, then somehow we can cultivate a certain amount of resilience towards it. And I'm really saying a certain amount because in my experience, it'll always be there. You know, I might get to be, you know, who knows how long I've got. I might get to a point in my life where actually shame doesn't have such a big impact on my life. But at the moment, it still has a power. It still has a powerful voice, you know. And we've talked about it.
Even in that statement, though, what I hear inevitably is that you've in some way accepted that that's there.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I have, and the great thing that I'm not trying to do anymore is get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because as we go back to that word combat that you used earlier on really resonates. You know, how do we combat shame? What are we supposed to do? Are we push it away? Do we chop it up? Do we put it in a incinerator? You know, what can we do? It's part of us. You know, it's been embedded in us such a long time that to be free from it for me seems unrealistic. So I might as well accept it.
I mean, that word combat comes from my inevitable violent upbringing. Combat has always been, you know, that statement of fight back.
Yeah.
But that's where the freedom comes in the word acceptance for me, in not having to fight back, choosing not to fight back.
Yeah, choosing not to fight back. Yeah. When I talk to people about acceptance, they often get it confused with other things. And that can be a really useful thing to know what acceptance isn't. And the big thing that it isn't is understanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
And knowing that it isn't understanding is really useful because it saves us so much time and so many why questions. Yeah.
Yep.
Understanding is really a kind of a why thing. Yeah. And acceptance, if I was going to describe it, pick one word to describe it, is a that thing. That's how it is.
Yeah.
But that leads us into another little trap, which is the trap of resignation, because people think when I say acceptance that I'm saying resignation, and resignation is a heavy, heavy feeling that that says this is how it is, and this is how it will always be.
Right.
Yeah, that's resignation, and that's heavy. It's like lead. Yeah, it's like one of those vests that you probably got at your gym. You know, that you put the weights in.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and it's really burdensome. And the other thing that acceptance isn't is tolerance. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not just putting up with stuff. Yeah, because that, if we go back to the gym metaphor again, is just like trying to hang on a bar forever. You know,
Yeah.
even, you know, I mean, I probably can't do it very long, but you know, you could probably do it for quite some time, Johnny. You know, but you can't hang on forever.
if you're not going to make me do it, then yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You tell me tomorrow. You get back in on that bar and tell me tomorrow how long you hung on the bar. Tolerance is like holding on, and our knuckles are white. But we can't hang on forever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Acceptance is, I guess, it's a mixture of thought and feeling. So I like to think of it as an attitude, really. And I don't know if it's a mixture of thought and feeling, and I don't need to know. That's just how it works, thinking for me. And that says this is how it is right now. So, and that's it. It's really about the now, and that is a really simple concept that can be quite difficult to come to terms with at first, because as humans, living in the now involves stepping away from the past and the future.
Yeah. Stepping away from potentially feelings of injustice, replaying them little trauma movies in your head, and feeling all them feelings. It's hard. My initial reaction to acceptance was someone was getting away with something. And that's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the same as forgiveness, or the concept of forgiveness. I've heard
it's not about the other person.
That's right. Which doesn't feel fair, but at the same time, once you feel that freedom that comes with acceptance, forgiveness, whatever you want to call it, it's worth it. That's what I would say. So my next question would be to you, and I sort of know the answer, but I just love the answer, is what if you can't accept it?
Right. Okay. That's when we go to the acceptance gym.
Yeah.
That's when we go to so right, when we go to the gym, often, and you'll know this more than anyone else, people will go and try and do too much, or they'll try and lift weights that are too heavy, or overexert themselves, and often they'll get hurt, or they'll certainly get so achy and so much what do they call it, delayed onset muscle soreness. Do you like that? I know the word there. That they won't go back.
They can't go back. They can't move.
Can't go back. They're coming down the stairs on their ass. And so what we do really is we talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. A trainer maybe, or somebody who's got a bit more knowledge. And what he or she will say to you, well, let's start out with something realistic. And maybe that thing is too big, too heavy for you to accept. But there is something that you can accept, and that is the fact that you can't accept it. Now that might sound ridiculous, and I've had people look at me as if I'm insane when I say that.
Might be one of those people.
you might be one of those people.
At one point.
And people say, well, I can't accept that. And I'll say, well, okay, well, let's just accept that you can't accept that you can't accept that you can't accept that. And eventually we'll get to a place that they can accept. And what happens, you see it, I see it happen time and time again, a kind of smile and a sense of lightness comes across them, because it's the feeling of acceptance. And on a physiological level, there's a little trickle of oxytocin going through their body, and that combats, and it does combat, the adrenaline and cortisol in their body. And it feels nice. The thing about acceptance is it feels nice.
It does.
It doesn't mean the thing that we're accepting isn't painful.
That's the bit I mentioned.
The stuff is painful, the stuff is unpalatable. But we've got to a place where we can accept something to do with it. And the something might be the fact that we can't accept it.
Yeah.
And over time, like any other skill or attitude, if we practice it, we'll get better.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that. And then what I wanted to say, the thing I want to bring in is the idea of compassion. Because on a good day then, and what I mean by a good day, on a day when we're not so stressed or we've had enough sleep and things like that, our capacity for acceptance is high. And let's be compassionate that we all have difficult days. We're living in a really difficult context right now.
Yeah.
You know, difficult to accept this for many, many people. But we can always find a level that we can accept. And when we do that, if we practice it, we'll get better at it. You know, it's really simple.
I mean, I'm sort of obviously internally grateful for that lesson, because, you know, when I first spoke to you, that was a laughable conversation in my eyes, because what I hadn't realized is that I was allowing my childhood trauma to live in my head sort of rent free,
Yeah.
and continue to do these things. But it was within my control, because it's simply at this stage a memory, a very painful memory that's had a very sort of long lasting effect. And I have to stay vigilant all the time about how I think and how I feel. But that initial sort of resistance was, why should I forgive? Why should I forget? Why should I let that person get away with the things they did to me? And that's where, you know, you spoke a bit firmer and you were like, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking for that acceptance. And it's that realization that I didn't have to resist anymore, but I could just accept and allow that burden, that problem, that trauma to be that other person's problem and not my own anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So thank you.
It's okay. There's a saying, you know, there's a saying that goes around about resentment, you know, which in a way is the opposite of acceptance. It's when we allow something to really niggle at us, you know, and resentment means to feel again and again and again, you know.
Would you say there's some work that goes into resentment from the person?
Well,
some effort.
Yeah, it's easy in a way.
Right.
It's easy to stay, and we can, as humans, we can fuel it. You know, we can stay bitter, and it's easy to stay bitter. Whereas the generosity that's required of acceptance, you know, that it's that feeling that we are letting somebody off the hook, you know.
Yeah.
It is difficult, and because it's difficult, and because it's probably new for many people, it will involve anxiety, because anxiety crops up when we do anything that's new. Yeah. A saying that I've heard in relation to resentment is that it's like drinking poison and waiting for somebody else to die.
Like that. I've not actually heard you say that. That's nice. Well, not nice, but you know what I mean.
You know, who suffers?
Yeah.
You know, who suffers? How does it serve us if, like yourself and myself, we've got work to do in the world? You know, to burden ourselves with resentment, you know, is to carry a load that's possibly going to reduce our effectiveness in the world.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, how would you define anxiety for those that might struggle to understand it?
Okay. Let's go back to the big three that I talked about before: anxiety, shame, and disgust.
Yeah.
Those three emotions. You know, that's what they are. I feel anxiety. If you can say I feel and then the word, it's an emotion. I feel anxiety. I feel shame. I feel disgust.
Yeah.
So those three emotions, which sit in a very primitive part of our brain, you know, that they get stimulated in a very primitive part of our brain. They sometimes call it the lizard brain, the amygdala. Yeah.
Right.
They are three things. that kept us safe as we were evolving.
Yeah.
Because shame kept us living in a group. Disgust meant that we didn't poison ourselves so much, and anxiety meant that we were alert to predators.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now, anxiety has evolved to it's kind of gone to the lowest common denominator of efficiency. Yeah. And rather than do a risk assessment every time we come up against a situation, what it does is it does a familiarity assessment. Yeah. So it goes, yeah, that's familiar, I won't be anxious. That's familiar, I won't be anxious. That's familiar, I won't be anxious. Never seen that before, I'll be anxious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not anxiety, although we think it's related to danger, actually it's related to familiarity.
Okay.
Does that work as an idea? Yeah?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So, and I'll give you an example of how that works, because people will continue doing a dangerous behavior because it's familiar, rather than adopt a safe behavior because it's unfamiliar.
Okay.
And I see that in my work with addictions all the time. People will rather stay with their dangerous addiction or their addiction that's making them unhappy because it's familiar than move into recovery, where they would experience lots of rewarding things because it's unfamiliar.
Yeah. I mean, I've recently been reading Gabby Mate's book. I forget the title now. The Ghosts.
In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts.
That's right. Yeah. And that's an eye-opening book when it comes to addiction. The whole idea of it being a brain illness or a brain issue is not a concept I had considered before. So you know, that whole tie in there with anxiety and familiarity and addiction is interesting to me.
Yeah. You know, and so anxiety is a reaction to unfamiliarity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it works on off. Familiar is safe, unfamiliar is unsafe.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a great kind of real world example of that. When we first went into lockdown last March, the message was stay at home.
Yeah.
And that really worked, because it was you were either at home or not. Yeah, everyone knows when they're not at home because they're not at home. Yeah. I know that sounds.
No.
Over time, that message changed to stay alert. Yeah. And that doesn't work for our anxiety because there's too many things. It likes a yes or no answer. It works on a binary principle. It works like a computer. It's just an on-off switch.
Yeah.
Familiar, unfamiliar.
Yeah.
And so stay alert didn't work for people because everybody had their own assessment of what alert was.
It's also not sustainable, really, is it?
Absolutely.
No,
it's not sustainable.
Staying alert constantly would be quite tiring, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, being in an anxiety state all the time is exhausting.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's how I see anxiety, and hopefully that's how I present it to people. Going back to, you know, what I do well, I present it in a way that becomes acceptable.
Yeah.
And the other thing I say to people is, because loads of people come and say, I've got anxiety. And what they really mean is, I've got anxiety and I don't want to have it.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people who I spend time with eventually learn to do, and eventually can be quite a short time, paradoxically, if we give it as much time as it needs, is they learn how to be anxious.
Right. Okay.
Which is, again, it's just noticing mindfully, I'm in an unfamiliar situation here. I'm bound to feel anxious. You know, if I lean into it a little bit, I'll be okay. You know, we have a capacity for discomfort, and just compassionately talk ourselves through it, you know.
You're using very acceptance style words.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah.
You know? And go on, sorry.
No, you finish, please.
Yeah, and I'm doing a piece of work at the moment about language and how, if we can begin to look at our language and change our language to, as you say, more acceptance style words, and I think I've identified what they are. Everything can change. You know, and one of the things I talk about that is really useful is if we move away from evaluating ourselves and situations to just describing them. So there's a little piece on my website about this, and we talk about the weather, you know, because people will say, oh, it's atrocious, the weather, and actually or it's marvelous, the weather, you know, when it's sunny, you know. Now for some people sunny is not marvelous.
Yeah.
For some people heavy rain is really useful.
Yep.
You know, so if we can begin to notice situations and just describe the situations, we then avoid the difficulties that evaluating the situations bring to our lives. Because if the weather's atrocious, we'll have feelings attached to atrocious. If it's raining a lot, the feelings will be different.
Yeah. So by changing it to description, you almost take away the judgment.
Absolutely, take away the evaluation.
Yeah.
And that was really central to the work of Carl Rogers. Which is if we can learn to describe our experiences rather than evaluate them, then our ability to accept those experiences is much greater.
I mean, it never ceases to amaze me. If, you know, as you pointed out, in these times of, you know, a global pandemic and necessary lockdowns and vaccinations, in all aspects of it, there is heightened anxiety. What sort of final piece of advice could you give to anybody who is struggling with anxiety and is skeptical about the idea of acceptance?
Well, what I would do is to ask them just for a minute to look at some evidence in their own life. And probably let's use the pandemic and the lockdown as an example. And just to notice that I think it was March the 23rd, 2020, the lockdown started, right. Yeah. And so many people were really anxious about going into lockdown, myself included. You know, it meant my livelihood was threatened and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And 6 weeks later, many of those very same people were anxious about coming out of lockdown.
Good observation.
So here we go. We're going into lockdown. It's unfamiliar. 6 weeks later, lockdown's really familiar. So we're not feeling anxious anymore about being in lockdown. Coming out of lockdown, however, is unfamiliar. So we feel anxious about that. So that goes back to the thing about familiarity rather than risk. Because actually, if we think about it, going into lockdown was a really safe thing to do with regard to coronavirus.
Yeah.
And yet people felt really anxious about it.
Yeah.
And it was the unfamiliarity.
Well, it simply had never happened, had it? Something like that. You can't really find anybody that's lived through an international lockdown.
No.
You know?
No. So it makes sense that there is an anxiety. And the other thing that's really, I think, really important to realize about anxiety is that it is contagious.
Yeah.
I don't know about reptiles, but it's definitely contagious in mammals.
Right.
And if you look at meerkats, they're all anxious. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a great analogy. It really is.
Yeah, they are. They're all anxious, and they actually delegate people to be more anxious than the rest of them, so they can all be anxious. You look at horses in a field, one of them gets spooked and they all charge across the field. Yeah. Same with any animals. You meet someone at a party who's feeling anxious and tongue-tied. What happens?
Yeah.
You feel anxious and tongue-tied.
Yeah.
It's mirror neurons,
Yeah.
And so it can be really, it takes practice, it takes some dedication to realize that when we're feeling anxious with another in an anxious situation, and to have a kind dialogue with ourselves that says, yeah, of course I'm going to feel anxious here.
Yeah. So you would say that the way you speak to yourself in a potentially a soothing way, a respectful way, a loving way,
Absolutely,
and have that trust in the sort of solution approach of acceptance. I know you probably don't like the word solution.
Well, I prefer the word outcome than solution.
Outcome. Okay.
Outcome. I'm a great believer in aiming low so that I can achieve a little bit higher.
Yeah.
And again, that's the language of acceptance, and paradoxes are hard for people. Paradoxes in themselves bring out anxiety.
Yeah.
Because people try to understand them.
Yeah, I mean, as you say nothing sounds more silly, like trying to understand something that's potentially ununderstandable by nature.
That's right. Yeah. But because our familiar thing is to try and understand things.
Yeah.
When we let go of the idea of understanding and just at first try to accept, that is a new activity. So we will feel anxious. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
So we bring some compassion to the anxiety because it's a new activity. We try to soothe ourselves and just accept. There's a great place to start with accept. When I try to accept, I'm bound to feel anxious. Just accept that.
That's the first step.
That's the first step.
I would absolutely love to bring somebody on Live Talk to talk to you who doesn't agree with you, because I don't think they would win that discussion.
You see, I wouldn't disagree. I wouldn't disagree with anybody. When in my work, if somebody has a fixed belief, say I am useless,
right,
I'll observe their belief. I'll say, that sounds like a really fixed belief of yours. And they say, yeah, I am useless. I say, it's not my belief. And I say, and the fact that it's not my belief means, in the nature of how beliefs are, that it's not an absolute belief, because there's one person, me, who doesn't believe it. And it only takes one person for it not to be an absolute belief. So I just make a little crack in the ice of that frozen, fixed belief. And, let the other person do the work over time. And if I have to remind them that it's not my belief, I can do that all day long, because I'm not using a lot of energy trying to break a belief. I'm just telling them what my belief is.
I thank God for you personally. I think well, I know that might bring out the shame, and I'm sorry about that, but okay. You're a great guy, and I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful for your time today.
Not at all. It's been lovely.
Would you like to take the opportunity to tell people about some of your work, in the sense of your website, your Instagram, and where they can find you and get in touch?
Sure. So it's lifetimetherapy.co.uk. I think it's Lifetime Therapy on Instagram. I found out that it's much better to get people who know how to do things than try and do it myself. I know how to talk about acceptance, but I don't know how to do Instagram. Facebook is Lifetime Therapy again. And if you're interested in gratitude, and maybe we'll talk another time about this fantastic concept of gratitude, there's Lifetime Therapy Gratitude Practice. You can go to that Facebook page and join in with hundreds of other people who do it.
And what do they do on that?
They record 3 things a day that they're grateful for.
Wow.
And the neuroscience behind that is compelling. You know, it could save the NHS literally billions of pounds if we all practice gratitude.
So let me check my understanding on that. You have a Facebook page where people simply write 3 things every day that they're grateful for.
That's right. Yeah.
What a wonderful concept. That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Lifetime Therapy Gratitude Practice. They just interact through gratitude, and that doing it in a group just multiplies the effect.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
It's people all over the world. You know, I think it's about 600 people. It's a shame there's not 6 million. You know.
Yeah, well, let's try, shall we?
Yeah.
I've got to get 6 million people to listen to us now.
Okay. All right.
But listen, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for your time today. And as you say, it would be lovely to get back together again and talk about gratitude at some point.
Yeah. Okay. No worries.
Thank you very much, Malachy.
Thanks, Johnny.